When it comes to my taste in TV shows, sitcoms are my absolute favourite. When they're great, they're endlessly rewatchable collections of funny scenarios which, being readily available in the age of streaming services, can become ever dependable comfort food too. I love many, but looking over all the ones I've seen, I think it was Fawlty Towers that really made me an enthusiast for the genre. I'd seen a few episodes when I was about 9-10 years old and enjoyed it, but it wasn't until a few years later when I suddenly had an urge to revisit it that it became one of my favourite shows and I began to seek out other comedies. Fast forward to now and I've seen most of the episodes hundreds of times, still finding myself entertained without fail. For those who haven't seen it, the title refers to a quaint hotel in Torquay run by the easily irritable Basil Fawlty. He develops a quick dislike for the guests unless their upper-class folk will raise the status he craves for the hotel. More often than not, though, the guests are extravagant personalities whose demands and general well-being sends Basil and the rest of the staff into a mad frenzy trying frantically to maintain the sanity of the hotel. If you want to understand my taste in comedy, look no further than this show. It has everything I find funny, visual gags, witty one-liners, slapstick satire, and most of all, bluntness. The sarcastic delivery leads to lots of lines which aren't universally recognised, but catching them properly on repeat viewings are the moments which crack me up the most.
Yes, go and kill yourself!
I know.
Well, why is she telling you then? Well, what are you stinking the place out with those for? What's up with the plastic ones?
Being ironed.
Even though much of the humour comes at the expense of the character's dignity, this does stand alongside other comedies which I'll turn on a whim to cheer myself up. That's of course because it's very funny, but what makes Fawlty Towers stand out is how intricate everything feels, and a lot of the pleasure from rewatching it comes from seeing how exquisitely crafted it is.
So Connie and I, never started to write the dialogue until we got the plot right. And that usually took us 2.5 to 3 weeks. Then once we got the plot, we would start writing the dialogue.
Hearing John Cleese and the rest of the cast discuss the show is a joy, because it really highlights how much care and thought went into each of the 12 episodes to give them the longevity they've retained over nearly 50 years. True, it's not 100% timeless, there is the odd reference which will go over the heads of most nowadays.
Out.
Kurt, who do you think? Henry Kissinger? You never know when Henry Kissinger's gonna drop in, do you? Henry Kissinger? Just anyone with a big net.
But the plots of each episode are virtually unaffected with age. Yes, even the Germans episode with people still claiming the Major's racist rant is offensive now, despite the point of that scene is that it was offensive way back in 75. We're laughing at his cluelessness, that's the whole point of the episode. But I digress. The precision of John Cleese's and Connie Booth's writing leads to expertly orchestrated chaos, with sharp writing which is inherently character-driven in every moment. A lot of comedies are about the leads being presented with a situation, the comedy coming from how they react to it. Fawlty Towers starts with an initial scenario, some of which aren't even problems to begin with, but the impulses of Basil and the rest of the staff turn it into a calamity. And the individual relationships the main cast have with one another adds to the fast-paced mayhem. The scripts having to juggle Polly's quick thinking, Sybil's viperous attitude towards her husband's cock-ups, Manuel's naive attitude along with his inability to properly communicate, and Basil's tendency to make a mountain out of a molehill. They're all great characters, wonderfully performed by the respective actors whose dynamics add a lot to the show as a whole. You have Sybil, who shows herself to be more than capable of running things smoothly, but decides to let Basil flail about instead. She goes from helpful and kind to stern and frustrated over the span of the episode in a natural manner. A few years back I was in a play as a villain, and when it came to my evil cackle, I referred heavily to that iconic laugh. It's actually quite brilliant how Sybil and the waitress Polly both act as a counterbalance for Basil's behaviour, so he's not just running around like a headless chicken. Sybil keeps him in line, while Polly adds a guiding sanity amid the chaos, instinctively helping out to uphold some semblance of order. She's naturally kind, and while I don't know if this was intentional or not, but it's interesting how in the second series some of the attitudes swirling around the hotel seem to have rubbed off on her. She has more of a rough edge in the later episodes. But even then, she remains a key member of the staff in the sense of normality she brings to the proceedings. Next, there's Manuel. Rest in peace, Andrew Sachs. His death was one of the ones I was genuinely gutted about because he absolutely owned this role.
When I suggested to Connie that we had the Manuel character, the only idea that I had in my mind was that at that particular time, none of the waiters and none spoke English at all well, and that was, of course, because they were cheap to employ, so it was the employer's fault.
Hello, Fawlty Towers. How are you? It's a nice day.
That practice isn't employed nowadays, I wouldn't think, but they do explain it in the show so it's not confusing for a modern audience, and his primary role in the show is for misunderstandings to easily occur and to be a target for Basil to unleash his anger on, leading to some of the more wince-inducing moments in the series. He has so many small, hilarious moments thanks to the accent and the physicality of the performance being so brilliant, and the way he plays off John Cleese, it's an easy way to find a goldmine of laughs out of a simple scene. And speaking of Mr. Cleese, no one, and I mean no one, puts his characters through as high energy paranoia as good as he does. There are moments where it's exhausting to just watch him scream and vigorously move his body, but oh so funny too. It's kind of interesting that even though he's rude to the guests and his co-workers, I can't help but root for him. Because the show is from his perspective, we get to see how insufferable the clientele can be. It's why I don't particularly like the Waldorf salad episode. As fun as it is to spot the guy in it appear in the likes of Empire Strikes Back and Full Metal Jacket, his character is an uptight snob and he never gets any comeuppance. Even though there's usually some kind of failure at the end of each episode, Basil does usually get a moment of victory to balance out the times he makes a fool of himself, which is pretty satisfying. Partly because the actors they get to play each guest are perfectly cast. For as annoying as I find the characters in the likes of Waldorf Salad and the Anniversary episode are, the acting from them is still great. There are so many memorable supporting roles, even the ones who don't directly impact the plot. Rarely does an extra merely exist in the background. The way they're interacted with by the main cast shows them to be more than just blank slate, and I think the scene which best demonstrates the sense of character bit parts have is with the kid and the chips.
Garbage.
Now, Ronald.
These eggs look like you laid them.
Ronald.
Look here, old chap.
Shut up. Leave him alone. He's very clever.
With only a few lines, you know exactly what the deal with the family is. The dad has no backbone, the kid's snobby behaviour is large in part because you can tell the mother does little to discourage it. It's an inconsequential 2-minute scene, but its inclusion adds a lot. I think it's the contained setting of the hotel which allows for the multitude of memorable characters to shine. The action rarely moves away from Fawlty Towers, meaning you become accustomed with the layout as well as the consistent supporting roles like the two old ladies, the Major and Terry the chef in Series 2. The familiarity is what helps give it that comfort food vibe. It's almost like going back to a beloved holiday destination. You know it's good and it's easy to settle into once you know the ins and outs of, in this case, the storyline and character quirks. And what rewatches offer is a chance to not just notice the charms of the wonky sets, microphones in shot and the odd crew member in the background, but rather how tightly plotted it all is. That's what I really love about sitcoms. These standalone stories are incredibly well thought out in terms of the tiniest details. For example, I never noticed this until the last time I watched it, but there's a scene with the deaf Mrs. Richards trying to find the glasses which are on her head. The main focus is on Basil and Polly's frustrated reactions, but listen to Mrs. Richards.
This morning, when I was buying the vase. Mrs. Richards!
The vase comes into play right at the end, but for ages I missed that small piece of foreshadowing. I love details like that. It makes each episode feel like a complete package, everything connecting together and running like clockwork seamlessly, which is especially impressive given how many moving pieces there can be in the most chaotic moments. Fawlty Towers is farce at its finest. The characters are well drawn yet simple enough to let the viewer focus more on how funny it all is. It's like listening to a piece of music time and time again. I've grown used to its rhythms and can stick it on for a full episode or even just a few minutes of one, and it instantly allows me to take my mind off things and enjoy the chaos unfold. It's chock full of classic moments which always leave me smiling or appreciating the performances and dialogue. It's timeless when it comes to entertainment value. The decades gone since it first screened haven't robbed it of any of its ability to produce laughter. It's one of a handful of shows which I get an itch to revisit every few months. It's a constant for me. I'll often be quoting it.
Naturally. Naturellement.
Whenever it tickles my fancy, I know I can just boot up Netflix or whip out the box set to be delighted by the exploits of Basil and Company all over again.
A gin and orange, lemon squash, and a scotch and water peas! Right!